its unending mission to explore strange, progressive concepts, to defend truth and civilization, to boldly go where no conservative has gone before.
Captain's log, stardate 2713.5. In the distant reaches of our galaxy, we have made an astonishing discovery. Earth-type radio signals coming from a planet which apparently is an exact duplicate of the Earth. It seems impossible, but there it is.
Switching to screen. I believe I can get something visual.
You know, I started this program without sound. And we got your ads, of course. We got to do the ads, so let's not forget the ads. Hang on a second. Oh, dear Lord, I'll tell you what. You know, would it be nice to be an engineer? An engineer would be lovely.
Well, sir, I can put together some odds and ends, but it won't hold for long.
Yet again, critical hull breach detected. Life support failing. Reactor overload imminent. The great SWAT 1011 gets the comment of the year. Looks like we actually have volume. Yeah, don't forget your mic tonight. Thanks, Brad. It's as I said last week. You know, when you actually have the microphone turned on, and you can hear what the host has to say, especially since we don't have any videos. I got a lot of feedback and said that people enjoy the show a lot better with the mic actually turned on. So I put that on my checklist, and it's going to be a priority from now on. And you'll also be pleased to know we're recording, and I will try not to hit the delete button at the end of this one either. I want to do something about that background light that's a little bit blue. Oops, a little bit. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. It is the most amateur-produced show in the history of the internet. I do it all by myself, sitting here in my little room. And I don't know what it is. This is absolutely true. I've done the show, 6, 7, 8 times now, and I've always had 8 minutes to prep. I just shoot into the office, got 100 things to do, got to get the lights up, all this other stuff. I'll try and have it done a little more correctly next time. Cheers. In any case, it's good to be back, and thanks again for that. I had to reboot it because I plugged the mic in after I'd started Ustream, and so it didn't see that. But we're hitting the record button this time. But I tell you, I don't do any prep for this show, obviously. And I put the comments up, open up the comment stream in Facebook a couple hours before we roll, and I'm always thinking, man, am I going to be all right? Am I going to have something to talk about? And the quality of the comments and the questions are absolutely unbelievable. Honest to God, I could do 90 minutes on every single one of the things I saw in the comments section today. So it's always nice to know you associate with a high-class group of people, because that's what you are. These are profoundly good questions.
A question. Since before your sun burned hot in space, and before your race was born, I have awaited a question.
So, well, let's start at the top here. Kurt Varnalo says, hi, Bill. Hi, Kurt. Was wondering if you could discuss the role of the Western in the promulgation of conservative values and whether it diminishes as a major genre from the 60s onwards is correlated to the rise of progressivism. That's a damn good question. You know, it's funny. I have a prop handy. It had nothing to do with the question. You're going to find this hard to believe. But the fact of the matter is that the thing about the Western, I think, that's most American and so exemplary of American values is not necessarily the fact that it's set in the West. Because the idea of a guy with a six-shooter defending himself and his civilization, his country, and his people and all that other stuff is what kind of made this country great. But it doesn't have to be a six-shooter. It doesn't have to be a Colt 45, and it doesn't have to be on the high plains. It could be one of these. That's a Mark II phaser, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, you can always, if you're going to a cocktail party, take the Mark I with you. And vaporize your Klingon adversaries that way. But, you know, the principle is the same. And I did maybe my favorite afterburner. My God, I just developed a severe case of jaundice. What happened? I just leaned forward and I turned absolutely yellow. Fix this. You know, this is one of these wonderful things where it's like, you know, you have color correction, and it's designed to make your life wonderful, but actually all it does is just kind of mess things up. I look like an Oompa Loompa. Wonder what happened. Let's see if we can bring some more color back in here. In any event, the Western is a genre that resonates with Americans because it's all about our frontier values, and we are a frontier people. And the reason we're in the trouble that we're in is because we've lost sense of being a frontier people. We don't have the threats, frankly. I think that's really what it comes down to. We don't have the threats that made being a frontier people so dangerous and so much of a survival of the fittest thing. I did a trifecta. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of this nasty yellow because that really is really annoying. I think the reason that we have these frontier values is because they kind of self-reinforce, right? The United States was settled by people who are risk takers, of people who didn't want to sit down and just keep handing the Lord or the King or the Emperor or whatever the case may be more of the turkeys or chickens or bushel full of potatoes and taxes, and they didn't want to be told what to do and they didn't want to be told how to do it, and so they decided to go someplace where they could be left alone, frankly, and make it on their own. And that aspect of America is what is exemplified in the West, is the idea of us kind of being left alone. I'm still trying to get rid of that yellow. It's just bugging me so much. It's a great advantage of doing a show where you're all by yourself and you kind of have to solve these. Hey, there's a pink. See, when I change the background color, because of this auto kind of thing, when I change the background color, the foreground color changes to do the kind of general balance, and if we can get the blue. Well, we're just going to leave it. We're just going to leave it at that. We'll do a green Stratosphere Lounge today. We have a frontier value, and what that means is we have a culture that's based on being left alone, a culture that's based on self-defense, self-reliance. All of these other American values are based on the environment in which the American experiment began. One of the things I've made the case on before was that the American system of government was predicated on an agrarian society, first-wave society, where you were really basically dealing with people who lived on farms. The idea of gun control is just absolutely, it's not just anathema, it's not just a bad idea, it's rank insanity for people who live on their own farms, have no way to protect themselves against wild animals or bands of marauding criminals or Indians or the British or whatever. So of course you'd have your own gun. What would you have? You couldn't live without a gun. You had a gun to go out and hunt game and so on. And it's only when you get into the cities where the presence of guns becomes a problem for some people philosophically. And if you really think about all the values that make America what it is or what it traditionally is, they all kind of come back to this idea of being out in the wild. Because being out in the wild makes you a better person, has to be. There's the natural selection aspect to it, which is, of course, it should be fairly self-obvious. If you are dumb as a box of hammers and you have to go out and chop your own wood or defend yourself, or if you're lazy and you decide that you're not going to grow more crops than you need to eat, but you also need to grow enough crops to plant next year's crops, and if you don't have the discipline to conserve those crops for the seed corn for the next year, if you start feeding on those just to have a little extra buffer rather, next thing you know, end of winter comes along and you don't have anything to plant, and that's the end of you. So it absolutely is a cultural. The Western is a cultural recognition of the values that made America what America is, and those values are conservative values because they're frontier values. And by the way, I remember when I was a little kid watching Westerns, because Westerns were everywhere on TV shows. I watched Bonanza and Branded. Remember Branded? Branded was so awesome in the beginning, where they take the guy's stripes and they break his sword, and that was a really awesome show. And Big Valley, and all of the Western movies that you grew up with. But they're all about self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and the individual, because you were individuals. Your nearest neighbors might be a day's ride away. There's a great moment, there's many great moments in Unforgiven, which is a Clint Eastwood movie from 93, I think. Terrific Western. And one of the moments is, he's going to leave his kids on the farm for 3 weeks. Boy's 13 years old. Son, here's your rifle. You know where the ammunition is. Take care of your little sister. Nowadays, you won't let a kid cross the street at 13 without a bicycle helmet and one of these sumo wrestling suits on the off chance that he falls down, skins his knee or something. And so what happened was, because you gave kids responsibility at an early age, they lived up to their responsibility. They grew up. They became adults. And that's another thing about the Western vibe. But the reason I brought out the super awesome bitchin' phaser, which I'll bring out again, because I think maybe it was the red LEDs. The reason I bring out the awesome bitchin' phaser is because it doesn't have to be a Western to promote those values, but it does have to be about the frontier. Star Trek was an amazing part of my life because Star Trek was about the frontier, and I got derailed as I often do earlier, but my favorite afterburner, certainly not the best afterburner, but my favorite by a wide margin was the Dowd Conundrum, where we did the whole thing from the bridge of the Enterprise. And I spent a lot of time talking about how Star Trek got started, how Gene Roddenberry basically tried to sell them a sci-fi show. They weren't interested. He wanted to do a show based on Horatio Hornblower, these adventures of a Royal Naval captain on the far side of the world. And Roddenberry was fascinated about the idea that since he was 5-6 months out of communication with Great Britain, he became Great Britain. The captain of the Horatio Hornblower had to be Great Britain. And that's what he wanted to do with Captain Pike in the first pilot, which was very cerebral. It's called The Cage. And NBC said, we like the space idea, but we were told, it was our understanding this was going to be a space Western. That's how Roddenberry got him to put up the money. So Roddenberry made a second pilot called Where No Man Has Gone Before with James Kirk, and it was much more a Western. He's got a rifle. He's got a phaser rifle. Takes place outdoors on rocks and gunfights and, the whole thing. But Star Trek is a Western. That's why Star Trek, the original Star Trek, is the only Star Trek that counts. I know I'm going to get mail about this from the nerds out there, and I'm certainly Lord God Bufu King of the nerds. But none of the other Star Treks count. Only the original series counts, because only the original series is set on the frontier. Every one of the other Star Treks is set in something that's not the frontier. We don't know what's going to happen next in Star Trek, the original series. Wherever the Enterprise is going next is a place where no one has gone before, where no man has gone before. Boldly going where no man has gone before. There's one I think that's really interesting from Russ Johansson. He said he got in a discussion with a friend of his about the Second Amendment. I'm reading here. He says his friend's argument was that some statistics show that guns are often turned against their owners, so gun ownership was not a great idea. He lives in Chicago. He's quite an intelligent guy, and so on and so on and so on. What's my position on that? Sometimes you can make the argument the clearest by going right to the extremes. So let's just go right to the extreme of this argument. If every single gun sold in America was used for suicide or was turned upon its own owner. So just so we're clear, if every single gun that was legally sold in America ended up being used for suicide or for the murder of the person who bought the gun, then gun ownership would still be a moral absolute good. Because when you are talking about it on that level, what you are really doing is you are talking about the difference between being an adult with free choice and the freedom to choose their own course of action versus a person who is a slave who will have other people make decisions for them based upon what they perceive to be their good, which really usually, if you look at it close enough, is really their own good. So even in the most extreme case you can possibly make, that every single gun in the country was used for suicide or for the murder of the owner, it would still be morally good to allow people to make that decision. Because when I started getting into this gun argument late in my life, but early in my career, I wrote an essay called Freedom, It's in Silent Americans, about gun rights. I made the whole number of the practical cases, and I made all of the arguments about this and that. But what I came down to when it was all over, putting aside home invasion, putting aside your fundamental right to defend yourself, putting aside the history, putting aside all of the things that you can make the case for gun ownership, the one argument that I kept coming back to at the end of the day was, when you allow people to own guns, you have, by definition, created free citizens as opposed to slaves of the state or dependents of the state. One of my very favorite quotes of all time in anything is a quote from a Confederate congressman near the end of the Civil War. And since I love the quote so much, I should remember the guy's name, but I don't. But here's what happened. As we were getting into the final weeks of the Civil War, the Union had been arming black soldiers for quite a while, well over a year, giving them arms and putting them into battle. And the manpower shortage in the South was so drastic that there were serious discussions about arming Southern blacks and putting them into the Confederate Army in exchange for their freedom or not in exchange for their freedom. There was serious talk in the Confederate ranks, and I believe Robert E. Lee was in favor of it because his manpower situation was desperate in the final months of the war, of arming Southern blacks and putting them into the Confederate Army. And this Confederate congressman said something that just went through me like a bullet. What he said was, he said, if black men make good soldiers, then our entire theory of slavery is wrong. Just let that sink in for a minute. Here was a man who actually understood what he believed in. His theory of slavery was that these people, black Southerners, could not be armed and deserved to be slaves because they had such emotional and mental inferiority that they would not know how to operate the firearm or would not be able to behave with valor or courage under fire, that they would simply either drop the guns or run away or whatever. And he had the self-awareness. Was it Cobb? Thank you very much. He had was it Tom Cobb who was at who had his great moment of glory at Fredericksburg on Marie's Height? Anyway, I saw that in the comment section. It might have been Thomas Cobb, but whoever it was, Bill Lee, I don't know. Anyway, it was a guy, and he said, think about that. He had the presence of mind to say that if this is in fact correct, that they make good soldiers, then our entire theory of slavery is wrong. Why do I like that quote so much, especially in relation to the Second Amendment issue? Because it's true. It's true. Giving a person a gun and asking them to go and defend something is the definition of someone who is not a slave. Somebody else said it's Howell. I don't know. Howell Cobb. Thank you. Isn't that a remarkable thing for him to say? So even if every single handgun in America was used for a suicide or to kill the person who bought the gun, the ability to buy a gun and to own a weapon privately for your own self-defense is the defining social wedge which determines whether or not you are a free adult responsible for your own actions and capable of making your own decisions or not. It's just that easy. Then you can start getting into all of the practical things, and there's nothing like the number of handguns that are being sold or turned on their owners. We were talking about flying earlier. There's an expression in flying that's just as true as it possibly can be, and that expression is, I would rather be on the ground wishing I was in the air than to be in the air wishing I was on the ground. And this kind of comes back to the gun ownership for me. I'd rather have the gun and not need it than need the gun and not have it. One of my favorite sayings from the gun rights crowd is, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. There are so many reasons to argue for gun ownership, and I've done it before. And I've got a gun rights thing on one of the What We Believe things on YouTube. So if you look up What We Believe gun rights, you pretty much hear me make the whole case. But I think that's really what it is. It ultimately is a moral argument. And I think people need to understand this in terms of the larger context for an argument I make all the time, which is when we argue with liberals and progressives and we talk about policy, we lose. But when we talk about philosophy and morality, we win. So whenever we get into the things like the statistic rate or the murder rate, and especially when we go down paths which I think are traps, which is the hunting trap, right? Well, I need the guns for hunting. No, it's not that I need the gun to kill somebody. I want to have a gun so that I can go hunting. Handguns are not for hunting. I suppose some people hunt with handguns, but it's just so common. I've never heard this before. Red Fisher in the comment section says, I carry a gun because a cop is too heavy. That's just absolutely hilarious. But when you say, oh, I need the gun for hunting, that's cowardice. That's not going to the issue. That's not what you need the gun for, and you both know it. I'm sure people have guns, and that's all they do with hunt, but the reason you have a handgun is so you can kill people with it. That's what the gun is for. The gun is designed to kill people, and that's why it's there. And you need to run right in the face of that, because if you don't, people smell fear in you. They smell the lack of commitment. They get the sense that you don't believe what you say you believe. You got to go right at these guys. And this is the thing I've learned from Breitbart, and I've learned through many years of experience arguing with people many years before I met Breitbart. Do not give these people the moral high ground. Do not let them say that gun ownership is illegal, that you should be allowed to have it because of some 250-year-old clause on a piece of paper. You should be allowed to do this illegal, immoral, awful thing. No. It's not an immoral, awful thing. The fundamental right of every single organism on planet Earth is the right to defend itself. I've often talked to gun right groups, and I've said, I saw a video. I love this little video. It's on YouTube. I can't remember where to find it, but you've probably seen how orcas, killer whales, will hunt seals, and they'll beach themselves. They'll chase them right out of the water, right out of the surf, onto the beach, and then the seal gets on the beach, and the whale literally comes out of the water, onto the beach, bites the seal, back it goes. I saw one of those once, and you just see this froth on the beach, and all of a sudden this little seal emerges, and this giant, enormous orca is right behind it with its mouth open and its teeth there, and it snaps its jaws, and it misses the seal by this much, and that seal turns around and bites that orca on the nose, and then waddles off to safety, at least for the moment. Now, I saw that video, and I thought to myself, anybody watching this video, anybody out there watching this video thinks that seal doesn't have that right to bite that orca? Is anybody watch this video and go, oh, that poor aggressor seal, that's so mean to do to that orca that just wanted to eat it? Well, that's really mean. Of course the damn seal had a right to bite that orca on the nose. Of course it did. And if that seal had a decent 12-gauge shotgun and a thumb, probably wouldn't have so much problems with the seal population and the orca population, right? Of course that animal has a right to defend itself. And if a seal has a right to defend itself, and if a pufferfish has a right to blow itself up so it doesn't get swallowed by other fish, and if every single animal on the earth that has claws and horns for self-defense, when you see a lion take down a water buffalo, and the water buffalo puts his horns down and tries to gore the lion, does anybody in the world think for an instant that water buffalo does not have a right to do that? Honestly, does anybody look at that and go, that's unfair? How dare it fight back? Why should you just lie down and become dinner? Of course not. Of course you have the right to defend yourself. And the fundamental right to defend yourself predates all other rights, because your right to freedom of speech and your right to freedom of religion and your right to freedom of assembly and your right to not testify against yourself are not terribly useful if you're bleeding out dead in an alley someplace. So let's get to the questions. Joshua Schweitzer asked, given the atrocity that overshadows the film, have I seen The Dark Knight Rises, and can I comment on its blatantly anti-socialist, anti-Occupy Wall Street messaging? Yes, I can, and yes, I will. I will do this without spoilers. I know there's some people who haven't seen it. When the lights came up in that movie, the first thing I said, I saw it with Jeremy and a couple of other friends, and I said, that is the most conservative film that's ever been made in human history. That is, I don't know what the budget was, let's say it's $300 million. That is a $300 million blow for freedom and liberty, the likes of which I've never seen. It's a great movie. There's so much to talk about with the movie. You know what? I'd like to concentrate just on the movie and not so much on the shooting. We'll come back and maybe get to that later, because there's a lot to be said about that. But let's just talk about the movie today. I just finished recording a Bill Whittle show at PJTV, which is my favorite commentary. I love doing that show. Nobody ever gets to watch it. You have to be a PJTV member, and it's terrific stuff. It's hidden. Nobody gets to see it. But I had the lights come up after Dark Knight Rises, and I said, that is the most conservative film that's ever been made. And Andrew Klavan, as it turns out, said the precise exact same thing. Yes, Brandon, far more conservative than the Avengers. The reason that The Dark Knight Rises is the most conservative movie ever made is not because it preaches conservative values. And this is entirely what we're trying to do with Aurora and with Arroyo, Jeremy's movie, which is about to be released. He's just about done with it. The reason it's such a great conservative message is not because it preaches conservative values. The Dark Knight Rises, I think this is obvious from the trailer, so again, I'm going to try very hard to be avoiding spoilers here, but The Dark Knight Rises, in a nutshell, is what happens if Occupy Wall Street people get their way. It shows you, with $300 million worth of production values, what will happen to America if Barack Obama and his anti-prosperity policies and his class warfare actually comes to fruition. This movie is about Occupy Wall Street. This movie is about law and order, and it's about a billionaire and his resources, using those resources for good, versus the nihilism, the socialism, and the mob rule of Occupy Wall Street. You have to see this movie. You have to see it. It's so good on so many levels. It's stunning. It's shocking. I can't believe the film got released. A lot of people said that the previous Dark Knight movie, The Dark Knight, was actually a very conservative movie, and it was. And many people made the connection between Bruce Wayne as Batman and George W. Bush, because at the end of the second movie, the previous movie, the man who has gotten dirty, who's gotten his hands dirty defending civilization, is vilified for it. And the people who were actually the villains get the credit. And basically at the end of the second movie, Commissioner Gordon says essentially, you're going to be hated and despised for doing the right thing. And Batman says, okay, I'll take that deal. Many people drew that connection with Bush. But this movie is in a league all its own. This movie shows in horrifying realism what the end result of this class warfare in Occupy Wall Street looks like. There are people being pulled out of their homes. There are look, it's the French Revolution. If you want to know what the French Revolution in America in 2012 looks like, go see Dark Knight Rises. There are kangaroo courts and show trials. The wealthy are pulled out of their houses, kicking and screaming. They're murdered in cold blood. All of their property is redistributed to the poor. And the point I made with Andrew Klavan earlier today was simply this: the real genius of showing what happens here is it gets to the big lie of socialism. Many people think that the big lie of socialism is that these people believe that spreading the wealth means that, that it's going to all be great and everybody's going to be equal and everybody's going to be happy and everybody's going to be equally prosperous. But the super untold lie of socialism is that the people who want to bring socialism never actually live under socialism. What I mean by that is, when Lenin and Trotsky and all those other guys started the Russian Revolution, they didn't organize the Russian Revolution, have the revolution, set up the workers' paradise, and then go back to work in coal mines, did they? No, they lived like princes in the palaces. They lived in the Kremlin. They lived in the Winter Palace. They had their little dachas. All the way through the Soviet Union, the people that talked the loudest about equality and so on lived like kings. Everybody else has to live in equal squalor, but not them. And in Dark Knight Rises, Bane, the villain, basically stands on the steps of a marble building with the marble columns in the background, and he tells these people exactly what they want to hear. He gives them the giant liberal story, right? He basically says it to them. He says, the time has come for you to end this oppression of the rich who've made their millions off the sweat of your brow. Bane basically gives the exact speech that you've been hearing from people like Barack Obama. It's the most powerful moment, I think, in the movie for me. What happens is this guy gets out on the steps of a marble building and he basically tells the great liberal lie. The rich people have taken all of your hard work and stolen it for themselves. And he says, no one will interfere. We are giving Gotham back to the people. You shall have your spoils, and you shall have your courts. And he tells them everything that Barack Obama has been telling them. And the mob takes over. And one of the many, many messages that you get from Dark Knight Rises is, if you give luxury to the mob does not live in luxury. The mob destroys luxury. They loot all of the houses. They deface the paintings. They smash the china. This happens again and 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 again. The only thing that you accomplish by destroying the successful people is now everyone lives in worse squalor than before, because now there's anarchy. Now no one's writing the paychecks. Now it's people sitting around, burning tires, roasting rats on a spit. It's not like if you give wealth to the mob, the mob and everybody in the mob suddenly lives like wealthy people. It's a decision they make. They loot and trash and destroy everything. They destroy everything. It's not that they're poor. It's not the people. It's not the poor people. You have to be very careful about this, because what happens when you give luxury to the mob in terms of a revolution, when the mob storms the palace at Versailles, or the mob storms the Winter Palace in Russia, or if the mob storms Park Avenue in The Dark Knight Rises, the reason that the wealth and the luxury is destroyed is because it is not owned by them and it was not generated by them. They did not produce it. They don't own it. They don't have any sense of ownership. Of course they destroy it. It's lifestyle choices. It's how they were raised. It's not racism. It's not even intellect. It's just a simple set of values that was never installed in them. And so take my car, for example. Last Stratosphere Lounge, I talked about my new Camaro. I love it more than anything. I give myself 10 minutes extra time before work and after work, not because it takes me longer. It takes me a lot quicker to go to work in my Camaro than it did in my Ford Escort. But because I go out to the car and I just stand there and look at it. I've had it for almost 2 weeks now. I've had it 2 weeks exactly today. And I stand there and look at it. And I can't believe that I own this car. And I sit inside it and I don't start the engine. I just look around and I said, look what your hard work has gotten you. Look at this. This is the result. This is the reward for all of those times going back 25 or 30 years when I would be working on stuff, when all my friends are out partying, I'm staying home working on things, or I'm working on computer graphics, or I'm working on movie scripts. Everyone else having a good time. I'm out here just working. Of course, I didn't actually build that. Somebody else built that. But it's a reward, right? If my Camaro, the car that I just bought, that, by the way, I've washed my car more times in 2 weeks than I've washed the previous car in 2 years. But it's because I love it, because it's mine. Now, if I had to give that car up every night and I got to drive the exact same car every 20th day and everybody else got to drive my car every 20th day, I would come back to the car and 5 out of the 20 people would take good care of the car, but 15 wouldn't. And when I'd get back into the car again the next time, it'd be all scuffed and marked and dinged and everything. And it wouldn't be mine anymore. And I'd say, well, it's already dinged and obviously nobody else gives a damn about it. And I'm tired of vacuuming out the Cheetos from the back seat. Right? And so the car would just get worse and worse and worse, and everything would come down to the bottom level. It would come down to the level of public everything. P.J. O'Rourke, the man who made me a conservative, man who really put me over into this camp, made me really think about things. P.J. O'Rourke said, if you take any noun, any object, and then you add the word public to the front of it, watch how it degrades the value of that object. Transportation, public transportation. Swimming pool, public swimming pool. Housing, public housing. It is the destruction of all of the pride and all of the care that makes things nice. Makes things nice. I'm going to tell you a story I don't often tell, because you know how the left quotes things out of context. This is not me speaking. This is a woman speaking. When I was a limo driver, I got here in 1988 and drove a limo in LA from 1988 to about 1991, 92, something like that. And I drove business people from San Marino, which is a real Tony neighborhood out by Pasadena, to and from the airport. I drove executives in a town car. That's all I did. So I would get to talk to top people, and I learned a lot from those people. One day I was driving a woman. She was sitting in the back. She didn't say a word. Good limo driver knows when to talk, and a good limo driver knows when to shut up. And she didn't want to talk. And we were driving through just the north part of South Central. Just south of the 10 is a road called Exposition, and it's a great way to move east and west. Nobody knows about it. It's the way to travel. It takes you through some fairly dicey parts of town. Nothing terribly bad, but it's not the best neighborhood. Now, I don't know whether this woman was a racist or not, because it's not a racist argument. Certainly she could be interpreted as being racist, but it's not a racist argument. And that's why I'm going to repeat it to you. She didn't say a word, and we were driving through these terrible, nasty neighborhoods. I picked her up in San Marino, which is a very nice neighborhood. And as we're driving through this neighborhood, she had, the whole time, she just had her head up against the glass. She was very worried, obviously deep in thought about something. And she said one sentence, and she said, not even to me, really. I think she was just thinking aloud. She said, if you took all of these people and moved them to San Marino, and took all of the people in San Marino and moved them here, in 6 months, this place would look like San Marino, and San Marino would look like this place. And I thought, my God, that's precisely correct. Now, needless to say, the left will come screeching out of the closet with how this is all about racism, but you see the point of it is, it's not about race at all. It has nothing to do with race. It's the opposite of race. She didn't say black people. She said these people. Oh, it's code. No, it's not code. What it means is this. It means that I firmly believe that the human animal is essentially interchangeable. When you have Supreme Court justices and astronauts who are black and you have the lowest form of dirtbags in the world that are white, it's fairly obvious to me it's the programming, it's not the machine. What it means is it means that the people who live in San Marino are successful because of choices they make. They're successful because of lifestyle choices that they make. People say, oh, it's their connections. It's got nothing to do with connections. I had no connections. My dad was a middle-class guy. My dad never made more than $44,000 a year, which was shocking to me. He was a hotel manager. He had some nice perks, but I was blown away by that when he told me that. I got no inheritance. And just so we're clear on this, when I had failed in any number of businesses, the one I'd failed in most recently prior to the work I started doing as a TV editor, I was the only guy in a computer graphics company. And I wrote and directed and did my own CG stuff, and I was a terrible businessman. I was not a bad CG artist. And things got so bad that my Uncle Ted decided to throw the circuit breakers on me, and in 1997 he pulled me out of Los Angeles, flew me to Australia for 3 months just to get my head together. God bless him. So I was down in Australia, and I was far, far away from everything, and the first month was great, and the second month I got homesick, and the third month I had to get back. So when I got off the plane in 1997 or 98, I guess it was, I had sold my car, I had no apartment, I had $40 in cash, and that's all I had. I had $40 in cash. My friends took me in and put me up in his garage, and then my friend's wife, because I was still in shell shock, saw an ad for an editing position in Orange County, which was a long way down. I don't know. She said, no, I've already booked you. You need to go down. So I went down. I didn't sit there. I didn't take welfare. I went to the interview even though I was feeling like hell. Something about my interview, for some reason or another, convinced the guy who was hiring me to advance me my first week's pay. I had no car. I had no apartment. So what we did was I sold a couple of things that I'd had, and I bought a bicycle for $35. And I took the rest of that advance, and I stayed in a bad motel. I stayed in a really, really cheap bad motel that was bike distance to this thing. And I did have another client who wanted me to do some video work for a sports team. I'd done some work for him for the Gators before I'd had this massive failure. So I got off the plane from Australia with $40 in cash. My friend got me the job. I went down, I lived in a motel, and I got in there at 5 in the morning, and I worked on this other job on the editing machine from 5 until about 8:30 or 9. Then from 9 to 6:30 I worked the job they were paying me for. And then I had nothing to go home to. And then I stayed from 6:30 until 10 or 11 o'clock at night and did some more work on this other stuff. And I lived in that motel for about 4.5 weeks. Rode the bike to and from every day. Nearly got mugged one night on the bike going home, and somebody just started running after me. And if I hadn't been in bicycle shape, they probably would have caught me, but they didn't. After I got the money from the extra job, I used that money to get an apartment. And I went in for to go to a place that seemed decent, and they ran my credit score, and they said, we don't think we've ever seen anything below a 350. These are just the facts. So I had to go through the embarrassment of having me be turned down 3 or 4 places, finally found a place that would take me for it, and I had to pay them 2-3 months extra rent, which I just barely had. And then I would ride my bicycle from work to home and back, and that was quite a ride. And after I'd done that for about 6 months, I was able to afford a used Honda CRX, which I got, and so on and so on. So look, this is not to tell you what a swell guy I am. This is the kind of story you hear about all the time in America. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I take care of my Camaro because I earned my Camaro, and I worked hard for it. And my friend Dana and I bought an airplane. She bought an airplane. She bought an airplane for me together. She bought it, and I paid it back. I paid back half of it. We wanted it, and she'd saved and had the discipline that I didn't have, and so now I have an airplane and a car. And these things mean the world to me, and I take very good care of them. But I take very good care of them, and this is the point of this entire long circular rant. I take good care of them because I worked very hard for them. Nobody gave me the plane, and nobody said you have to share the plane, and nobody gave me a car and said you have to share the car. They're mine. I worked for them. I worked very, 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 very hard. And I know you do the same thing, which is why this whole Obama thing about, oh, you didn't build that business, that's why it's so offensive to people. It may have cost him the campaign. I hope it did. You know, Romney had the quote, the best quote I think I've ever heard. Oh, it was taken out of context. And Romney said, the context is worse than the quote. I know we're kind of running around in all different areas here. But look, the point I'm trying to make is this. Go see The Dark Knight Rises, because The Dark Knight Rises shows you what happens when socialism comes to America. And Catwoman in the beginning, and this is in the trailer, Catwoman in the beginning wants this. She wants this. She's tired of the rich having everything and her having nothing. And so she gets what she wants. She gets this big revolution of the mob. And she realizes what a god-awful, horrible mistake this whole thing is. It is the most conservative movie ever made. Doesn't it just make you weep? Put aside the outrage of taking the money and spending the money, right? Put aside that. Doesn't it make you weep that the stimulus cost $900 billion, $900,000 million? Where is it? Where is that money? Are our bridges rebuilt? Are our interstate highways paved? Are there new tunnels? Have old dams been replaced with new structures? Have new dams been put in for hydroelectric? No. As a matter of fact, the federal government's in the business of blowing up dams that have been there since the 30s because we don't want the Delta smelt to be inconvenienced. And I saw somebody say an Aurora update. When I talk about space, I'm not just talking about the movie. I'm talking about the real thing. Where did it go? It's gone. It's gone. Where did it go? What could we have bought? You know, I want to do a Photoshop. Maybe somebody with Photoshop skills can do it. I want to do a Photoshop of what $850 billion could buy. And I wanted to be a picture of the ocean with, you know, I don't know, what is it, 70 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, and up in the sky, you know, 11 space stations being serviced by 70 space shuttles or whatever the number is, right? Here's what you could have bought for the money. Doesn't it? Somebody can do the math much better than I. Certainly it's enough to buy every single person in this country their own Rolls Royce, isn't it? Something easily. That's why we have to fight these people, folks. And honestly, this is a related question. I think somebody wrote it, but we have to be thinking about what we need to put in place to survive the economic and financial collapse of the world. Because all of this is coming down. Liberalism is doomed. It's doomed for any number of reasons, but mostly it's doomed because they've spent the money. You can't make a political philosophy of giving stuff away to people forever. Sooner or later you run out of money. They're out of money. This to me is what's interesting about Chick-fil-A. So let's stop talking about Chick-fil-A and talk about why it is that progressives like Rahm Emanuel and the mayor of Boston are comfortable. And not just the progressives. Don't forget the people who are doing the protesting. Let's not forget the people who are protesting Chick-fil-A. Why is it that all these people are ready to launch a jihad, if you'll pardon the expression, against a guy who says, I'm in favor of traditional marriage and we're not going to buy your chicken sandwiches anymore. We're going to protest you and not let you into our town. Why are they okay with that and not okay with people who openly say we want to murder homosexuals and who do it every single day? Why? Why are we okay with that in this country? Because the left has made an alliance. The left so hates capitalism and prosperity that they think, this is the deep thinking that we get from the left, and we all know how this is going to turn out. The left thinks that they can use these guys to get, you know, it's kind of like street muscle. We'll control them, don't worry. We'll be able to rein them in. When they find out how we liberals really are just totally cool with them. You know that Osama bin Laden thing? We probably could have avoided all that whole messiness with 9/11, according to the liberals. You know, if only he'd just come over up to our house up in the hills, and we could have, hung out in the hot tub together, maybe had a nice Chardonnay. I saw a cartoon about that, made me laugh, actually. If we could just sit in a hot tub with him and sip some wine, we'd work all our problems out. They actually believe this. So since they're the enemies of America, they get in bed with them. they believe all of this business about dividing the country up into disadvantaged tribes and identity groups, and Muslims is another one that's useful for them to gather votes, so they don't have a problem with these people that open mosques that openly call for the death of homosexuals. But they do have a problem with people who say they're in favor of traditional marriage, because those are the people they have to defeat in the polls in order for them to grab the power that they have to grab. Power grab is everything for these leftists, and when you have a life that, when you've got no religion and you've got no job and you've got no friends and you've got nothing that hasn't got anything to do with your religion on earth. That's what liberalism is. It's religion on earth. And so whoever is closest to being a problem, these are the people who are attacked. Right now we'll attack conservatives because they're people that, who are getting in their way. And I don't know how else to describe it, which is an interesting segue into the next two questions, which I'm going to kind of lump together. Aaron Walker says, what is it about the liberal thinking process that makes liberals wrong on absolutely everything? And how can conservatives correct the actual process that leads them to being wrong about everything, and hence making them start being right on everything? That's an awesome question. And Ray Kaysen has a similar kind of thing. It says, I've heard and experienced myself that liberals are much more likely to unfriend their online conservative compatriots than be unfriended themselves. What do you think of the attitude that will express opinion but not tolerate? What do you think about the attitude that will express opinion but not tolerate dissenting opinion? This strikes me as a hallmark of the difference between liberals and conservatives. Exactly right, Ray. Exactly right, Aaron. This kind of ties into Chick-fil-A, so let's develop this a little further because this is an important thing. First of all, one of the reasons why liberals are much more intolerant and much more likely to unfriend somebody is because they stick their fingers in their ears when they hear an opposing viewpoint. But we hear an opposing viewpoint every minute of every day. Conservatives in America, because the media and entertainment, show business, college, stand-up comedy, professors, schools, we hear the liberal message every single day. They don't hear us at all, which is why it's so funny when they often try to describe us. There was a report on Chick-fil-A. Some reporter said, I went down to the Chick-fil-A today, and I could not believe the homophobic, hate-filled I couldn't recognize the country. A bunch of people said, we didn't hear anything like that at the actual Chick-fil-A. Which Chick-fil-A did you go to and when were you there? And the guy walked the story back. I don't think he went at all. I think he imagined that people went to go to Chick-fil-A to say, oh, those goddamn, those queers, and all of this. No. People went to Chick-fil-A because they still understand that freedom of speech and freedom to believe what you want to believe is still important in this country. That's why people went to Chick-fil-A on the boycott day. I guess it was yesterday. They don't even know anything about us, and they don't want to hear anything about us, because ultimately, modern liberalism is not even a belief system. They talk about conservative extremists, ideologues. Of course I'm an ideologue. I am an ideologue because I have an ideology. My ideology is American conservatism with a good, strong sprinkling of libertarianism. Classical liberalism is what I am. I have an ideology. I think about things. And I have a belief system, and that's what you call my belief system. These people don't have a belief system. They have a system of justifying behaviors based on an emotional response to something that they feel usually guilty about. This is a very complicated topic. Let me isolate a little, like a subclass of liberals, because it's a little easier for me to deal with simply because I know them a little better. Let's talk about the Hollywood limousine liberals, the multi-millionaires who talk about having their taxes raised on them, and this kind of ties back into the filmmaking thing, I guess. When somebody like Brad Pitt, or I think Will Ferrell said it today, Will Ferrell said, I think the top tax rate should be 75%. People say, you're welcome to pay 75% if you want to, Will. You have to understand how Hollywood works and how all of this stuff works. Warren Buffett, the Warren Buffett rule, right? Buffett's a perfect example of this. When somebody says, I want to have my taxes raised, my income taxes raised, that's somebody who doesn't make a lot of money on income. Warren Buffett doesn't. I think Warren Buffett got an income of $100,000 a year, right? He's worth billions of dollars. All of his money's in capital holdings and so on. He doesn't get an income. He has his corporation pay him a token $100,000, and he pays income tax on that, which is why his secretary's salary presumably is higher than his, right, or tax rate. Likewise, when George Clooney or Matt Damon or Will Ferrell gets a $15 million payday for a movie, they don't write the check to Will Ferrell. They write the check to WF Productions. And WF Productions owns the office space and owns the cars and pays for the health care and probably leases the house and rents all the studios, and every single jet ride and everything that makes Will Ferrell's life comfortable is paid for by his production company. Then the production company pays Will Ferrell some token income, which he pays income tax on, maybe not even in the top bracket because the company pays for everything. I do the exact same thing, by the way. I have an LLC where all of my income goes, and the LLC buys everything that is a legitimate tax deduction, including the computers that I'm talking to you on now. And that's just smart. And it's not only smart, that's how business works. It's not really my income if I have to apply it into making more income, right? I don't get to keep the money I spend on this computer and spend it for business purposes. So when they talk about raising income taxes, it's all a joke. That's why they don't just give more money. They just... It's no skin off of their nose. It's like everything else. The same reason why liberals want to ban jet skis, because they don't jet ski. Or they want to ban ATVs because it's out ruining the desert. They've never been in the desert in their lives. They don't want, they don't want you to have McDonald's because they don't go to McDonald's. They don't want you they want to close airports because the noise is bothering me. Well, you moved next to an airport, ma'am. You moved in next to an airport. Yes, but we should shut the airport down because of all of the noise. Well, you're not a pilot, are you? No. So they're always trying to control things that they don't have anything to do. That's why they want to ban guns. They don't own guns. Of course they want to ban guns. No skin off of their nose for them to ban guns. They're busybodies. The fundamental difference between conservatives and busybodies is conservatives mind their own business. They have their own lives. There's some defective gene that probably comes out of some deformed proto-human ancestor that somehow took a cosmic ray in the brainstem somehow, and all of their descendants have this defective gene where they're not happy unless they're making other people do what they want them to do. They're miserable. They're miserable unless they can get other people to be miserable. And they want to control every aspect of your life. So they try to tell you what to do. They just mind your own business, damn it. That's the essence of libertarianism, right? It's really kind of the essence of conservatism. Mind your own business. You have to have a business to mind. If you don't have your own business to mind, you start minding somebody else's business. Here in Los Angeles and among the upper level of the liberal intelligentsia, and this is true for your garden variety street liberals in the Occupy Wall Street movement too, ultimately, guys, what it really comes down to with these guys is they have a very romantic view of themselves. They have a romantic view of themselves based on the fact that they don't seem to be very good at anything. If they were good at something, if they genuinely excelled at something, they'd take pride in their work. And if they took real pride in their work, they would have achieved a level of skill at whatever it is they're doing, whether it's clay pottery or brain surgery. If they were good at what they did, they would achieve a level of skill where people would want their product. Then they'd start selling their product. Then they become conservatives. So when you run into your garden variety liberal who's got his fist in the air and talking about, redistributing the wealth, or they've got a Save the Earth bumper sticker on the back of their Prius, what they're really doing is they're trying to find a way to make them special, to make themselves special. They don't do it through individual achievement the way we do. This is why I have, and I don't know how I can say this more plainly. I wish I had a chance to say this every day. I mean this from as far deep in the bottom of my heart as I have a bottom to my heart. I have infinitely more respect and admiration for a person who comes to this country who has no degree, no college degree, no high school degree, and who is a janitor and who does a good job every day. Infinitely more respect for that person, infinitely more admiration for that person. Those persons deserve to be called sir and ma'am, people who work hard for a living and do a good job. Infinitely more respect for a completely illiterate janitor than I do for a college professor with 4 degrees in medieval poetry who thinks that this country is awful and who thinks that the world owes him a gigantic living, and so therefore he's got a right to control everybody else's lives and tell other people how to live. Infinitely more respect for those people. They're honest, decent people. These intellectuals are horrible people. So your garden variety person out there who's holding a copy of War and Peace under their arm and never opened the book, and they've got glasses that don't have, prescriptions in the lenses, these kind of people, their coin of the realm is unearned moral superiority. They want to look and act better and smarter than you are. So when Will Ferrell says, I think the tax rate ought to be 75%, what he's really saying is, I'm a much better person than you greedy people out there. Yes, I make $15 million to stand in front of a camera and mug for a few hours a day and then go back to my luxury trailer. Yes, of course, I know that I could feed entire villages in Africa for the cost of one day's pay. Yes, I know that I work in an industry where I get paid in the space of a few seconds more than anybody else in the entire crew is going to get during the 6-week or 6-month length of this entire movie shoot. They know that. But by saying things like, I think we should give away 75%, I get paid too much, I make too much money, I should be taxed more, this is their way of showing you that they're swell guys and that they're decent guys and that they're moral guys and they're more morally advanced than you, but it's all a bunch of crap and everybody knows it. Everybody knows that the proof in the pudding is that Will Ferrell wants to pay 75% tax rate. He can pay that tomorrow, but he won't. If he really wants to live up to what he says, these guys like Matt Damon and George Clooney and all these guys making this posturing could simply abolish their production companies. They could have the check written to them. They could get a $10 million check for a movie and part with $7.5 million of it. They'll never do that in a million years because they're hypocrites, because they don't believe in anything. They just want to look and feel good. I'll tell you something else about most of these liberals. The reason that they have to plug their ears, and getting to Ray and Aaron's question about why they unfriend friends who are conservative, is because if it dawns on them that everybody else is doing something else, they'll change. They're victims of social proof. If all the cool kids were conservatives, they'd be conservatives. They don't know and they don't care. They just want to be cool. They want to fit in. And so this is why they can't hear another opinion, because when you talk sense to these people and you ask them to defend these things, you present them with facts and logic and history, then they start to have this cognitive dissonance. I can't start thinking about these things because if I do, I might have to change my mind. If I change my mind, I'd change my identity and I lose all my friends. So when you start hearing things about, well, why are conservatives so mean, and why do they hate the poor? It's like, you just have to sit down and explain to them why 50, 60 years of entitlement programs and war on poverty have created the most angry, uneducated, mean-spirited underclass in certainly the history of Western civilization. Have things gotten better with the trillions of dollars we've spent on social welfare programs? No. Just as an example, black marriage rates, I believe, used to be higher than white marriage rates. Certainly their out-of-wedlock situation was infinitely better. Their graduation was infinitely better. All of this stuff is just getting worse and worse and worse. And that's really what it is about being conservative, right? I've made this argument before. I'm not going to make it now. I'm holding on to this because I think this is a book. But basically, if you're in favor of individual freedom and maximizing human happiness, at the beginning of the curve, you're a liberal. You want to change things until things improve. And then when things reach maximum optimal happiness, when life gets as good as it gets and continued change starts to make things worse instead of better, then all of a sudden you become a conservative, right? You want to improve things and change things as they get better and better and better, and then when continued change starts to make things worse, you stop being a liberal, you start being a conservative. Whoa. Liberals are not like that. Progressives are people who think that change is always better, future is always better. They're wrong. Just no question about it. I could do a whole lot of time on that one, but I'm going to move on because I want to cover more questions during these things if I can. And get ourselves a good 90 minutes in there. Michael Hickey, glad you're feeling better. What's your take on conspiracy theories, and are there any you would admit to subscribing to? Just curious. That's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question because it goes to what defines rational thought. Sorry about that noise. That's how I look at it. Do you believe in any conspiracy theories, and if you do, which ones, and why don't you believe in others? And I think that is a pretty good lead-in for the definition of what rational thought is. Occam's razor, as most of you know, is the principle that all other explanations being equal, mind you, the simplest explanation is the most likely one. It's not always the one, but it's the most likely one. When you get into some of these big conspiracy theories, what you'll find that most of these conspiracy theories, which I have launched a personal jihad against, because I think in many cases they're just a sign of real inability to think clearly, and in some cases major mental derangement, because of the emotional appeal. The emotional appeal of some of these things are so strong that people have to invent the kind of mental gymnastics that tells me that their desire to believe something this awful is really overpowering in them. So I'm going to choose my words carefully here. Not that stopped me before. So let's take a couple of examples of some conspiracy-type theories, or at least, unusual beliefs. I think the best one is the Loch Ness Monster. First of all, you have to understand what powers most conspiracy beliefs, and that is that people like the idea of there being undiscovered things in life. People like the idea that there might be pixies or Bigfoot or Yetis or dwarves or something. The idea that the world is more interesting if there are unknown things out there, and that world becomes more interesting, and that you become a more interesting person by having discovered them. So let's go to Loch Ness. Certainly we can all agree that it is a much, 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 much more interesting world, and it is certainly a much more interesting lake if there is in fact a prehistoric plesiosaur living in Loch Ness. It's a much, much, much more fun world to live in if there is in fact a dinosaur in Loch Ness. So that's what powers the belief. And if you're standing there on the shore of Loch Ness, especially today, right? Let's say you go to England and you're just doing a tour and you decide, what the heck, we might as well go to Scotland. So you're in Scotland, you say, what the heck, we might as well go to Loch Ness. So now you're standing on the shores of Loch Ness, right? And out in the distance you see a ripple and there's no boat. Isn't your world a lot more interesting and electric? Isn't life much, much, much more fun? Don't you get that electric kind of a thrill down your spine when you think, oh my God, I see it. It's very powerful. One of the reasons I became an early opponent of conspiracy theories is because I had two examples very young when I started at the Miami Planetarium. I was 13 years old. I'll just tell one story. There were two, but I'll just tell you the one. I was working in the Southern Cross Observatory on the roof of the Museum of Science. I was probably 14 years old, and we would open up the observatory after planetarium shows at night on weekends, and we would show people Saturn, and we'd show them star clusters and Jupiter and the moons and all that stuff. And so we were up there one night, and this is in the heart of Miami, and they'd just gone to the sodium vapor lights, those orange lights, the brighter lights. And we were all up on the roof. There was a decent crowd of people, probably 20 or 30 people up there, and we're in the suburbs of Miami, and all of a sudden somebody looks up in the sky, and they go, oh my God, and they point. And off in the distance, flying towards us, we saw a V shape of about 15 ovals, glowing ovals in a V coming towards us. And everybody saw them. It wasn't like somebody imagined them. There they were. I saw them. And they were moving slightly erratically, but they were definitely flying in formation, and they were definitely oval. They were not anything. They were not airplanes. They weren't lights like that. They were these glowing kind of ghostly gray-white ovals flying towards us. And everybody up there got hysterical. People started sobbing. I was into UFOs and all that other stuff. I mean, why not? It's interesting. I didn't give any of this stuff any thought. And I was overwhelmed as a religious experience. And then somebody said, I heard somebody say, they're birds. They're just birds. And I said, they're not birds. They don't look like birds. You can't see wings. They said, no, look carefully. It's geese. What it was geese flying over. And because geese have a white belly, the reflection of the city lights going up into the sky, geese wings are dark, their necks are dark, they're almost black, but they're white ovals down below. And what you could see, if you started to look for it, because you had to look for it, if you started to look for it as you flew over, you could see their wings and you could see their neck, but you weren't looking for those things. You weren't prepared for it. And sure enough, they were geese. And I said, no, those are geese. And people were mad. They were really genuinely angry at the guy who said they were birds, because he'd taken all their magic away. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. You have that moment where you see them. Somebody mentioned magic, or at least Silent America. Thank you, Mark McConnell mentioned in the comment stream. I wrote an essay about this called Magic. When I was 5, I saw a leprechaun. I saw it clear as day. We were coming up from my dad's hotel. We're in the car. I look out, and I see a rock, and I saw a little man there in a little green vest, little green pants, and he had a little green hat, and he was smoking a little pipe. And I screamed so loud, I said, my God, Mom, stop the car. What is it? Stop the car, stop the car. She thought I'd having a heart attack or something. I get out of the car, and I go running back to that rock, and I didn't see anything. And we looked for 10 minutes. God bless my mom, She let me look for 10 minutes. As soon as I got home, I went on my bike, and I went back and looking for that leprechaun on that rock. I went there every day for a week looking for that leprechaun on the rock. And it's only when I got older that I realized that I had seen, what is it, Finian's Rainbow, or something McGee and the Little People, one of these Disney movies about leprechauns. I'd seen it about a month before. Now listen, I saw that damn leprechaun. I saw it. But that leprechaun didn't exist. Because we're faced now with the leprechaun story, we're faced with two choices. Either there is a race of magical little green people that live in rocks in Ireland, but apparently can appear in Bermuda as well, who have the ability to magically appear and disappear, don't farm or grow any crops of any kind, and guard pots of gold. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, you've got a misfiring of the mechanism that allows me to see the pictures in my head that I use every single day when I write a movie script. Because when I write a movie script, I'm out there. I'm in the movie. I hear the people talking. I see them open doors, and that's what the imagination is. Now, which one of these is more likely? Let's go back to Loch Ness. The simplest explanation for Loch Ness is so devastating. It's so devastating. I wrote about it in Magic. When I really started to think about it, it just shocked me at how much emotional steam we put behind our need for there to be these things. Because plesiosaurs, the ancient dinosaurs, the long-necked things with the big paddles, breathe air. They're air breathers, just like whales. We don't think of whales as mythological creatures because when a whale swims by on the coast, every few seconds, if not every minute or two, down goes the whale, disappears. And then a few minutes later, and then down it goes. So whales aren't mythological, they're real. Why are they real? Because they're air breathers too, and air-breathing animals have to come up to the surface where the air is. So, folks, when you think about it, if there was a Loch Ness monster, we wouldn't see one ripple every 30 years or some blurry picture. If there was an air-breathing dinosaur in Loch Ness, we would have HD video photographs from 10,000 perspectives, and we'd see it 15 or 20 times an hour. Everything that time came up, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, thank you, Bart. Every time that thing came up, we'd have pictures of it. Of course there's no monster in Loch Ness. And then all of that other evidence that I'm about to give you, which follows, is utterly irrelevant because it's an air breather. You'd have to see it 15, 20 times an hour. You'd see nothing but it. Then they get in Loch Ness, and it turns out there's no fish in Loch Ness. So what does this thing do? Does it order pizza? How does it eat? What does it eat? There's nothing for it to eat in Loch Ness. And then you find that Loch Ness is filled with logs that sink, and every now and then the bacteriological decay generates a little bit of methane gas, and this log rises up to the surface. People see it all the time. And then the log sinks again. Please. Okay? Obviously, there's no monster in Loch Ness. And obviously, there's not that kind of magic in this world. There's no leprechauns. I hate to be the guy who breaks it to you. This is the difference between liberals and conservatives. It sucks that there aren't leprechauns, and it sucks that there's no Loch Ness monster, and it sucks that there are no UFOs either. Because even the most obscure UFO sighting has got the challenge of being some unusual flying object, some atmospheric thing, some flaw in the camera lens, or maybe some advanced Defense Department vehicle versus a civilization that can travel across the light years and yet chooses to zip around in little things the size of Volkswagens and is not detectable by radar, except sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And they travel around the entire country and around a world with 6 billion people, and it's only seen every now and then, and it never lands right in front of a TV crew. It's always a distant glimpse, or there may be a little fuzzy shape behind a tree, or there's a kind of an odd-looking sort of a light in the sky. It's never a full-screen picture in front of everybody, and it's never these things. There are unusual things in the sky. There's unusual things in the ocean, too. But which is more likely? I think the chance of UFOs being actual flying saucers, alien species, is a thousandth of a percentage point. A thousandth of 1 percentage point. There is a slim chance that is the case. A slim chance. Slim. Microscopic. No chance, as far as I'm concerned. I certainly do not believe in them. But I suppose theoretically, we're getting to the issue of what conspiracy theories could you believe. I suppose theoretically, it's at least possible. Now, the 9/11 conspiracy, on the other hand, is impossible, which is why I despise these people so much, why I won't tolerate them. I will defriend them. I've done it. I had somebody say, once somebody said, Bill's obviously bought into the whole 9/11 truth thing, and bought into the official thing of 9/11, and we wish he'd open his eyes because he's so good with all this other stuff. I went right to their page. I said, I don't want you linking my stuff anymore. I don't want you sending my stuff out anymore. I don't want my name associated with you anymore. I'm not going to be associated with the people who are trying to distance the people that murdered those 3,000 people. I'll just give you one little example about the 9/11 conspiracy things. You see these guys, and they'll show a freeze frame of a video, and here's the bottom of the 757 on frame 692, and here you can see the weapons pod, which is not normally on the back of it. And I know what digital reflections do to digital cameras, but there's just weapons pod, and it's not on any other video. And it's not on even different frames of the same video. You managed to grab one freeze frame where there's some anomalous thing. We're going to build a whole case out of this. Meanwhile, these same people believe that the Pentagon was hit by a missile. Now, as it turns out, at my dad's funeral, which was at Arlington National Cemetery, is what got me writing Eject, 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 I talked to a guy who was doing a ceremony on that hill. He saw that 757 fly over his head at 50 feet. He watched it hit the Pentagon. He felt the blinding flash of light on his face, and then he watched as little pieces of people started to rain down, along with the aluminum. So, if that was a missile, then the people in the conspiracy had to get this Army major named Major Crisp to go along with it. And they had to get all of the families that were there for that ceremony to go along with it too. And they had to account for the people who were coming to the ceremony, who they may not have known about. They had to be in on the conspiracy. And all the people driving down the freeway, who happened to be driving down the freeway at that same exact time that the missile hit that building, every single one of those people had to be on the conspiracy. And the people behind them, because the traffic could have been a little slow, and the people in front of them had to be a little fast in case the traffic was light that day. All of those people had to be on the conspiracy, because if one person is driving along in traffic, of the thousands and thousands of people that saw that airplane hit that building, if one person comes out there and says, here, I got a perfectly good picture of it being a missile, then the whole thing comes apart, right? The whole thing comes apart. How absurd do you have to be to believe this? How absurd do you have to be? What happened to those jets? Well, those jets were flown to a remote location and the passengers were killed, and they were taken into Canada. They're flown over the Atlantic and destroyed. Really? Who does that? The military. How many military people do you know? This is what it comes down to with the 9/11 conspiracy, right? It was the CIA. How many CIA people do you know? I know a guy who works very highly placed in the FBI, and I know a couple of people who work in the CIA, and these are decent family people who love this country and are here to protect it as much as they can. These people are going to go out and murder innocent civilians for what? Because George Bush or Dick Cheney wanted to make some more money? You actually honestly believe that? You actually honestly believe this whole thing? It's absurd. Moon landing conspiracy the exact same way. I was once sent to do battle with a big conspiracy guy. You know, I was like the champion of the rationalists, and he was like an internationally known UFO guy. And we started talking about the moon landing. And before he started trotting out all this video evidence crap, which was easily destroyed, I said, listen, dude, I was there for the launch of Apollo 13. I saw Apollo 13 clear the pad with my own eyes. And I was standing among 300,000 other people who watched Apollo 11 lift off with their own eyes. You telling me that didn't happen? No, that happened. Okay, so let me make sure I got this straight. We're capable of constructing a rocket that is 365 feet high, contains 7 million pounds of essentially high explosives. And we're capable of lofting a lunar module, a command module, and all this other stuff into orbit. We can keep them up there in orbit. The Russians are tracking everything on radar. They're arch enemies. Remember, we're racing these guys for the moon, right? We're racing them for the moon. They're praying this capsule's going to explode. But we stay in orbit, and we make an announcement that they've just been up there, and we do the whole thing in a giant studio. And that really happened. When he admitted that vehicle actually went into orbit and burned 97%, 98% of the total energy needed to go to the moon just to get the thing into orbit, right? When he admitted that, I realized the guy's just mentally defective. There's something about the moon landing he can't process. Really what it was, it made him special. What I was talking about before, right? He's unique. He's an internationally known moon landing conspiracy expert. Now, he's not just some guy like me who happened to believe that we walked on the moon. The real evidence, I could do this all day, and God bless Mythbusters for tearing this thing apart, and people still, they've been bought. But if you really want to know the evidence of the moon landing, you could see it on Apollo 11, but it's clearer in later missions. Watch what happens to the dust at the feet of the astronauts, because when you see the guys moving on the moon, the dust behaves like water. It moves in slow motion because it's in zero gravity. It's in about a sixth gravity, so the arcs, the parabolas of the particles is very shallow, and the dust takes a long time to settle. But the reason you know it's not faked is you can't slow film down and do this. Watch the dust behave on the moon, and you'll watch that dust spray like water. When you see the rovers moving over the moon, the lunar dust, which is very fine, it's talc, comes out in jets like it's like a rooster tail in the water. The reason it looks so different is because dust in air is supported by the air. If you bang a couple of chalk erasers together in a classroom, you get a big cloud of dust. Why? Because the air molecules are supporting the dust molecules. But if you were in a vacuum and you bang those two things together, it would come off like water spray. So that means that the set had to be a vacuum, and that meant that the room had to be big enough so that it was in a vacuum, because you can't do this with an atmosphere. It only happens in a vacuum. And then you run into engineers, and engineers will tell you something interesting, which is actually you have to do the research on it to find out how true it is. But then I had an engineer tell me, you know, Bill, it is much harder to make an area the size of a movie studio into a near total vacuum. That's much harder than going to the moon. Much easier to go to the moon than to do that. He's absolutely right, too. He's absolutely right. And when you look at the rovers, and these rovers go on for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of uninterrupted footage, where did they think they shot this? Oh, they shot it out in the desert. Well, you don't get the kind of dust trails coming off of those things that you get in a desert. You cannot do that in an atmosphere. There's no way to fake it. There wasn't computer graphics. Of course we went to the moon. Of course we went to the moon. And the big question then becomes, what part of you is so emotionally diseased that you can't accept that? What part of you is so emotionally diseased that you cannot believe we did it? More and more kids today don't believe in the moon landing because they didn't think we had the computers. And the video looks like it was shot 100 years ago. Well, it wasn't shot 100 years ago. It was shot half 100 years ago. Yes, it was primitive video. Yes, they didn't have computers. Yes, they did this on slide rules or computers with the power of your, simple 4-button calculator that you get for $1 with a, Happy Meal. I think one of the real reasons that so many kids have problems believing that we went to the moon is if they had to come to grips with the fact that their ancestors, not just their parents, that their grandparents went to the moon doing the math in their head, they wouldn't be precious snowflakes anymore, would they? They begin to realize just how far they've fallen, just how far we've fallen as a people, how far we've fallen from the men that did those things back in the 1960s. They don't want to face that. I don't want to face that either, but I do. There's something diseased about somebody who watched those airplanes hit those buildings in real time. What is it about 9/11 that doesn't bear scrutiny? What is it? What doesn't bear scrutiny? What is it about the official story that's unbelievable? It's perfectly believable. It's 100% believable. Red Fisher in the comments said it's the need for attention. Exactly. Everybody, oh, you bunch of idiots, you sheeple. You sheeple out there believe the official story, but I am so deep, you see. I'm so incredibly intellectually advanced, and I'm so brave morally that I can see the machine wheels turning. Yeah, okay. Part of this is innocent, too, because before I started thinking about things, back when I was a lot more liberal, I read a book called Best Evidence about the Kennedy conspiracy. And this was a book that basically said that Kennedy was shot from the front, taken to his plane was put on the plane, and then they altered his wounds. They made entrance wounds into exit wounds and did this whole thing so that the autopsy would reveal blah, 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 blah. And get into the whole thing. And when you do this is kind of how liberalism works too. When you isolate everything and you just concentrate on one little variable, like that little pod on the back of one frame of a video of the airplane, you can start to get people. You isolate one little itty bitty thing and you make a little box around that and you go, that makes sense, right? And you go, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. And you have another little box over here and you say, that makes sense, right? You say, well, connect all the boxes, there you go, there's a big conspiracy. Nonsense. You have to look at these things in a string. So it just gets so frustrating to me. But anyway, I was reading this book, Best Evidence, and I thought, man, I actually got scared. I was reading, it was a rainy night in California, it's unusual, and I was living in a little apartment, I was a chauffeur, it was about 2 in the morning, and I was reading this book, and I thought, man, I am on to knowledge, I'm wondering if I'm being watched. I wonder if there's somebody out there watching me, because once it, I'm really on to what really happened. And then comes a guy named Posner, I don't think it was Gerald Posner who wrote a book called Case Closed, about the Kennedy conspiracy. And when I finished reading that book, it was one of the best books I've ever read. I can't recommend it highly enough, because when I finished reading that book, I said, okay, anybody who doesn't believe after reading this that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John Kennedy alone has got some emotional need to believe something different. He utterly destroyed, he doesn't destroy the conspiracy theories. What he does is he goes into detail about what actually happened. And when you have the details of what actually happened, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Lee Harvey Oswald was a. By the way, as he points out, as Posner pointed out, Best Evidence, which is a 400 or 500 page book, spends 2 pages talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, and then only as a patsy. You have to understand Lee Harvey Oswald to understand why he would shoot the president of the United States. And once you understand his motive and his motivation and just how mentally diseased that guy was and why he did it, then the rest of the thing makes perfect sense. I've stood in the window of the Texas Book Depository, and I've had guys who I respected as shooters saying, it's an impossible shot, I never could have made it. Doesn't look impossible to me. The guys who were doing the shooting and the recreation didn't look possible to them. Certain things about the timing issues are resolved by Posner's book. Once you read Posner's book, it gives you a perfectly understandable, believable, logical, reasonable explanation for what really happened. And this is an interesting point about 9/11 conspiracies and moon landing conspiracies and Kennedy conspiracies. No two conspiracies are the same. Why is that? The people on the reasonable side of the argument, our story is exactly the same. We have the exact same story about how Oswald shot Kennedy. We have the exact same story about how we got to the moon. We have the exact same story about what happened on 9/11. We don't have to have 15 different versions to make up for this problem or that problem. The truth has that quality. The truth has the quality of being believable. Yeah, was Oswald a leftist? You bet he was a leftist. He was a communist supporter, defected to the Soviet Union. They wouldn't take him, so he slit his wrists in a Moscow hotel, and they decided that the risk of an American dying there was worse, so they took him reluctantly. They gave him a job in a television factory in Moscow, outside of Moscow, and for about 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, something like that, this miserable, mean-spirited little bully of a man actually was a special guy. He was an American in Russia in 59, 60, somewhere in there. And for a brief period of time, he was a celebrity, and he got to meet a pretty girl, and he got to be the big man in the village, and everybody wanted to know what it was all about. And after about a month or 2 or 3, people realized that Oswald's just a little jerk, just a little sad, pathetic, weak individual, and they stopped treating him special. And then Lee Harvey Oswald fought the Soviet Union for about a year trying to come home. And when he decided he was going to come home, he and his wife were on an airplane, paid for by the U.S. government, I think. And he said to his wife, Marina, he said, be prepared for all the photographers when we get off of the plane in Dallas, because when we get off the plane and they see that this American defector has come back to America, there's going to be enormous press coverage. Of course there was no press coverage. Of course there was no press coverage. Nobody gave a damn about Oswald. That's what Oswald couldn't take. Once you understand that, it all makes sense. You find the people who got him the job at the Texas School Depository months before Kennedy even decided he was going to Dallas. And then this miserable little man who took shots at right-wing Texas personality named Walker, General Walker, took a shot at him. This miserable little man opens the newspapers one day. He's got a Mannlicher Carcano, which he's ordered earlier, because he just sits on his porch and just dry runs the rifle, right? He's going to shoot somebody. He's that kind of guy. Opens a newspaper one day and finds out the presidential motorcade is going under his window the day he has a major argument with his wife about him being such a loser and such a nobody. Yeah, it's an utter mystery how that happened. But Posner talks about something about conspiracy theories that I think really is essential. He talked about it with the Kennedy thing, but I think it applies to everything else. We talked about it with Nessie and the UFOs and that sense of being magical, something special, something different, exciting. What Posner said about the Kennedy conspiracy was, he said so many people needed there to be a conspiracy about Kennedy because they could not emotionally process the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation was, put aside for a minute your political feelings about John F. Kennedy. The reality of the situation in 1963 was it was untenable, it was unacceptable. It hurt to think that this handsome, charismatic man, this young, handsome man who carried the dreams of millions and millions of people, a man who was going to take us to the moon, a man who had a beautiful wife, a man who had set up Camelot, that this young, handsome, dynamic, most powerful man in the world could be taken out like that by a nothing, by a mean-spirited, lousy little runt, a mean, bitter, angry little guy with a rifle could take that away was inconceivable. It was intolerable. It was emotionally unacceptable. And so what Posner said, which I think bears such incredible weight on this thing, was he said, you have John F. Kennedy, the leader of the free world, this handsome young man on one side of the scales, and on the other side of the scales you've got this little itty-bitty, bitter, angry loser. And the emotional imperative is you want to add weight to Oswald's side of the scale to make this thing balance. It had to be about something, somebody, something. Maybe it was the mafia, maybe it was Castro, maybe it was the Russians, maybe it was Johnson, maybe it was a coup, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. It had to be something other than this. But it was that. That is reality. The best person in the world, the most giving, brilliant, fantastic, adventurous, loving, kind person, the best person on earth, can be taken off of this planet by the worst person on earth in an instant, and that is not something that bears heavy thinking about for most people. Is it? So the interesting part of the question is, are there any I would admit to subscribing to just curious? My method of thinking says to me that there are certain things that are impossible on their face, that create such logical dilemmas that I simply don't believe them. And the 9/11 missile hitting the Pentagon thing with thousands and thousands of people in traffic is a deal breaker. It immediately eliminates that conspiracy from my mind. It's utterly untenable from that point forward, any of that stuff. So 9/11's out. The moon landing, the reasons I gave you, the moon landing happened, that conspiracy theory's out. Nessie, I told you about Nessie, that's out. UFOs are not out. Because if Nessie's an air breather, then there is no Nessie. But there is a slim, microscopically slim chance that it is possible that alien creatures travel across the light years just so they can mutilate our cows. I suppose it's not logically eliminated. It's not empirically eliminated on its face, right? It's a microscopically thin chance that that's the case, but I don't believe it. It's not likely. I think the chances of it against 1,000,000 to 1 against, and so no, I don't believe in UFOs. What are some other things? As we get into areas that I know less about, I get less and less likely to be able to dismiss them. I'll give you a good example. There is a giant conspiracy out there about the Rothschilds and about the Illuminati and all this other stuff. I think that is extremely unlikely because of what I know about human nature. People don't like to cooperate over centuries or generations, and it's virtually impossible for two people to keep a secret. So when you have 10 or 20 or 1,000, it gets hard to believe, but I can't eliminate it. Somebody else has mentioned TWA 800. I find the missile description of TWA 800 to be unlikely. I think there is a good explanation for what happened to 800, which was a faulty wire causing an explosion in the main fuel tank of that Boeing 747. That to me is a more likely case, but there were some witnesses who saw some unusual lights. I suppose it's possible that if there was a guy in a rowboat with a SAM, I suppose it's possible. I would put the TWA 800 as in the very unlikely case, but not ruled out. There's no reason that I have to rule it out. It doesn't transcend logic like 9/11 does. It's fun to take them from the comment section. Bigfoot, can't rule Bigfoot out, but Bigfoot is unlikely in the same way that not in the same way that Nessie is unlikely. Nessie is physically impossible. It's an air breather. The lake is limited. Nessie does not exist. Bigfoot is just exceedingly unlikely. You'd have to have a breeding population. There should be much, much, much more evidence for Bigfoot. I think the chance of Bigfoot's about 0. And when you find out that these iconic images of Bigfoot, the one where he turns, or the footprints, when you find out these things are hoaxes because they show you the actual suit, when you can destroy the best evidence in favor of something that's extremely unlikely anyway, because it's got a zipper on it, really, honestly, no, there's no Bigfoot. Crop circles, most of the crop circles in Britain were made by one guy, and then they showed videotape. Now, here's how you know about crop circles. Crop circles appeared in England because of two men in a pub did it on a dare, and they started making a circle. You go out there with a flat board and you stamp down certain kinds of crops, and they lie flat, and they made a crop circle. And everybody said, "My God, what happened to the crop? Maybe it's UFOs." Then they got excited, and these two guys did it for like 10 years. They documented it. They would go out at midnight. Their wives thought they were cheating on them, and they made most of these crop circles. And then they started to figure out how to make them more complex. Interesting, isn't it, that the aliens didn't come and at the very beginning leave these super complex crop circles? Funny how that happened. It's like the aliens had to learn how to make crop circles themselves. Isn't that interesting? So over time, they finally admit it. Now, what's fascinating about the crop circle thing is a crop circle would appear on the ground, and grainologists, or cereologists, that's what they were called, would go out and inspect the site, and they'd get their detectors and their radiation things, and they'd look at the bend angle, because a bend angle of 47 degrees is possible with a flat board, but if the bend angle exceeds 63 degrees, then obviously it's got to be some sort of electromagnetic field. And all of these conspiracy cereologists would go out there, and they would declare that this crop circle is an authentic crop circle, not one made by a bunch of guys in a pub. And then the next day, the guys who made the crop circle that was just certified as authentic would show videotape of them making the crop circle using night vision goggles. And then it's time to move the goalpost. Well, this other one certainly is authentic. Come on. Honestly, really, what do you need? I think of all the conspiracies that are out there that are commonly called conspiracies, that some people dismiss as conspiracies, I think the one I would lend the most credence to are the ones that have to deal with the creation of the Federal Reserve. I've seen things about the creation of the Federal Reserve that seem just shocking to me. Shocking. But I don't see anything that's defying logic. And when you start to look at the kind of mess we're in with the Federal Reserve, I would put some of this malevolent motives of the Fed higher than just about anything that comes to mind right off the bat. That doesn't mean I believe it. The whole thing is a giant sort of a conspiracy, or I don't know. I don't find anything to exclude that. Bye Bye Cal wrote, "What about Obama's birth certificate?" My personal feeling is that there are tremendous irregularities with Obama's birth certificate, but I think that is not a tree to be barking up, because I think if I had to bet my life, I think the chances are probably a little better than even that he was born there. Some people say he was born in Seattle and moved, and then there's a whole Kenya thing. Look, I don't think that the birthers are a wacky conspiracy thing. I think they've got serious reasons to be concerned. I think the new birth certificate looks funny. I think Sheriff Joe has got some interesting points. I haven't studied it well enough to know. And let me tell you why I don't want to go out on a limb and say I believe the birth certificate is authentic. And this is an important part, and it's a good place to close the show for the night. The reason I don't want to come out in favor of saying the birth certificate is a forgery is because I have not heard the countervailing evidence. Namely, I haven't heard people make the case that it's authentic. I haven't heard explain to me in a rational, reasonable way why the attacks on the legitimacy are false. See, this is what I do for a living, and this is what I think reasonable people should do when confronted with these things. You have to open up and listen to what they're saying and let people present both the case and the counter case. You can't make your decision. The reason I believed in best evidence that the body was surgically altered was because I never heard the other side. And finally, isn't this a lovely bow to tie things up with for the night, folks? Isn't that really what the whole liberal control of the media and entertainment and putting your ears in and defriending friends on Facebook is all about? Making sure you don't get to hear the other side of the case? I can't rule out the birth certificate, and I can't rule it in. I don't know. I don't have the evidence. I haven't had anybody explain it to me. I think there's something smells funny there. I think this whole history of this guy is, I certainly know for an absolute fact that his entire history is a history of secrecy and covering up his background. I have tremendous suspicion about the background of this guy, but that doesn't mean I have evidence that his birth certificate is false. There are plenty of other reasons to disqualify him as president from stuff that he admitted in his own words in his autobiography, which I happen to think was not written by Barack Obama. I think there's a strong case, an excellent case, that Dreams for My Father was written by Bill Ayers. I think there's a remarkable, strong case for that. But I don't have proof. So if you ask me about some of these conspiracies, I can only tell you I decide on what I hope is a consistent basis. If there is a logical contradiction that simply defies the laws of physics or even the most fundamental common sense, things like an air-breathing animal that never comes to the surface, or a missile that's launched at a building and everybody's told it was an airplane, and making 10,000 random motorists lie. That just didn't happen. The idea that we would go into orbit but not go to the moon, and that we built a studio big enough to... That's nonsense. That didn't happen. We went and landed on the moon. We've seen pictures from orbit now with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. We can see the LEMs on the ground and the flagpoles and the tracks and all that stuff. Of course we went to the moon. UFOs, extremely unlikely. Yetis, somewhat yet less unlikely, but very unlikely. Faked evidence in all these cases, known faked evidence. Why do you have to fake evidence if it's true? How many belief systems are based on the fake evidence? And you get into Barack Obama's history, it gets a lot more credible. And then certain things that I don't know much about, like the history of the Fed. I just don't know much about the history of the Fed. But I have heard enough about it to make me think, that seems a little unusual. Anyway, I think that'll wrap it up for the night. Looks like our timer here is 1 hour and 48 minutes. Give you a little extra added value there on account of our late start because of these technical issues. And maybe, who knows, I might be able to get us moved over to live stream next week. I keep threatening that. Maybe I should just shut my mouth and just continue on. I'm going to make a major effort to hit the save button here, unlike the delete button, which I did last time. As always, I don't feel like I can ever close the show without saying how much I appreciate all the support and all the incredible support on Facebook. I didn't even have a chance to write a congratulations, kind of a mutual congratulations post on passing 15,000. That was 10 days ago. We're at 15,720 now. We're almost at 16. So thank you all for your support. I owe my livelihood to you, and my livelihood is turning into a really lovely, lovely life, and I owe it all to you and your support, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm very grateful. So I will put up the link for the show tomorrow, once it gets onto YouTube, and we'll try and do it again. And I don't believe in unicorns, Ian McLaren. Let me say one last thing about this. I like the fact that children believe in unicorns. I really like that. I like the fact that children believe in unicorns and Santa Claus and all that stuff. That's what children are supposed to believe in. That's what makes childhood magic. That's why Disney World works. Comes a time when you have to grow up, right? Or not. But I'd rather be an adult and face the truth, because when you get into the details of how the world actually works, the wonders of the real world far, far, far exceed the wonders that we can invent in our limited little 8 brains. So it's the 8 brains signing off for yet another Stratosphere Lounge. Thanks for joining us, and we'll try and see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye now.